We continue to look at the passing of COPE founder Mosiuoa Terror Lekota. We're now joined in studio by SABC News reporter Samkele Maseko just to speak on the legacy of Mr. Lekota. A very good afternoon to you, Samkele. You know, when we speak of Mr. Lekota, we speak of a man who was part of a generation that carried the very enormous task of confronting apartheid, a very rich struggle history, but also a history that cannot be understood outside of the teachings and principles of the African National Congress or even the UDF. So before we get to the founder of COPE, let's just talk through the ANC era, the UDF era, and broader mass democratic movement.
If you look at the legacy of Terror Lekota, you cannot divorce him from the student uprisings of 1976, particularly if you look at his role within the South African Students' Organization, SASO, that was preceded by NUSAS, which was largely influenced by black consciousness of Stephen Bantu Biko at the time. He was in the same struggles and the same organization of SASO as in President Cyril Ramaphosa in those dark years of the liberation struggle, particularly in 1976, where the youth took to the streets within the townships. But if you take it broader, you can't just define the politics of Terror Lekota to the pre-state province and to the student protest and the student movement, particularly within the 1970s. You can take it as far back as to a township in Claremont in KwaZulu-Natal in Durban, where he played an illustrious role, particularly within the student formation, within the formation of SASO, working with the likes of Stephen Bantu Biko and many others within the student formation. If you look at the former Deputy Speaker of the National Assembly, Tinotsi, whom he worked extensively with within the structures of the underground in KwaZulu-Natal, in the MK and in the other structures of the African National Congress, basically the underground, galvanizing young people to join the liberation struggle, particularly at that young era, going to working with the individuals in areas and townships such as Lamontville, and going broader into the national space as well. When he arrived in Robben Island, you look at the role he played in being persuaded to join the African National Congress, in speaking to ANC leaders, particularly of the Rivonia Trialists, whom were on Robben Island at that particular time after he was arrested during those particular student protests, after the 1970s protests of the students' uprisings within the country. Then you fast forward that into his years within the United Democratic Front, the UDF, which was at the time when the ANC was banned, working with many people across South Africa in forming the United Democratic Front. To remember that letter that he penned to his daughter on his arrest on Robben Island, speaking that he wants a better future for his country, and he is currently incarcerated and would come back and pursue the liberation struggle for a democratic, free society that all South Africans live in peace and in harmony with. So he's got an illustrious career when it comes to the liberation struggle, from SASO, going to the UDF, and ultimately to the African National Congress.
I suppose when you touch on his contributions in KwaZulu-Natal, they were legitimized because he became the first chairperson of Southern Natal there. So, and then we go on to the UDF. We know a number of people have already spoken out. Trevor Manuel, Cheryl Carolus was also part of UDF. So quite a number of people having worked with him quite well. But I want us to then fast track beyond the ANC as a political party and to his role in government. He's now the first premier of the Free State, and then beyond that going on to become defense minister. Just share his legacy there, because I was listening even today, just driving here on the radio. Fikile Mbalula spoke quite highly of his contributions even in the Free State. So share with us that legacy.
It's not just the Free State. There are a number of young people, particularly I want to just go back to that point of the Southern Natal and the history of the Southern Natal region within the broader politics of the ANC and of the country. The likes of Natim Tetwa come from the Southern Natal region. They come from the hands of Terror Lekota. That's how illustrious this career of this individual has been, and how he's always imbued and always wanted to depart political knowledge and intellectual depth and ideological clarity to the youth, from his days in SASO to his days in the Southern Natal region within the African National Congress, the UDF, and subsequently going to the Free State. You'd remember as well, in the Free State was a province fraught with divisions. It was fraught with divisions. Former President Mbeki had to intervene on numerous occasions in order to deploy Terror Lekota to the Free State province, because to quell the tensions that were there. You had an Ace Magashule who was rising through the ranks of the African National Congress, who was not liked by the leadership of former President Mbeki within the African National Congress. So ultimately, you had to bring in the likes of Terror Lekota to diffuse that particular situation and ultimately have Terror Lekota going on to becoming the national chairperson of the African National Congress, and ultimately lost out at the 2007 Polokwane conference. You look at the amalgamation of the Free State province, the building of the Free State province, particularly during his in bringing security of tenure and dignity to the people of the Free State. Even still today, some of them still struggle, particularly noting that Free State is arguably one of the most underdeveloped provinces within the country, but has a rich role when it comes to the agricultural sector and now the renewable sector that is playing itself out in this current epoch in politics and in the political ecosystem within the country. You look at how he was able to advocate for areas to have proper dignity and sanitation, even though that legacy was never truly fulfilled, because you speak of Fikile Mbalula comes from an area called Buchabelo in the Free State. They still use the bucket system. 30 years on into democracy. And those are some of the issues that the likes of Terror Lekota, the likes of Ace Magashule, and many others whom have been at the top echelons of leadership within the country have arguably failed in transforming the lives of South Africans. But he has played a critical role in bridging the gap, particularly between the Afrikaner community and also the black community. He is multilingual. He is able to converse eloquently in Afrikaans. So he's able to bridge that gap and to be able to unite people around a common vision, even though in the latter parts of his life, many within the Congress movement may have felt that he ultimately sold out in leaving the African National Congress to form Shikota, what was COPE.
That's when we speak of the 8 days of September that Frank Chikane writes so eloquently about in his book, where they all took the decision, or some of them, to say with the recall of Thabo Mbeki, they're going to leave. Let's just touch on that a bit, because it became a very defining part of his life now to the end of his politics, because many might have felt that might have not been the best decision, but what they cannot take away was that it was principled. I mean, to forgo the luxuries of being a defense minister, you were not recalled, you were not fired, you were not reshuffled. Talk to us about that.
It was a defining moment within the political career of Terror Lekota and many others like Mbazima Mashilowa, who left with him to form the Congress of the People. You'd remember at that time the ANC was fighting for the name COPE, as Congress of the People was ultimately where in Kliptown, where the Freedom Charter was adopted. But the ANC had no patent to that particular name of Congress of the People, just like it had no patent to the name of Umkhonto weSizwe. And it speaks to the relationship Terror Lekota had with his boss at the time, in the form of Thabo Mbeki. They were comrades. They were ultimately allies in the 2007 Polokwane conference of the ANC, where the Zuma tsunami ran over them, held a scandal. For instance, if you look at those visuals, there was a point in time when the conference was starting. Terror Lekota is the national chair. He must chair the session. Delegates were singing the Tumshini Wami. They were singing Zuma songs. And some of them were having those change signs. And ultimately, he was bombarded by the likes of Fikile Mbalula, who were leading the charge for a pro-Jacob Zuma slate to emerge at that particular conference. Fast forward to the ANC recalling former President Mbeki. Looking just now at the visuals of Congress of the People, it was arguably one of the most racially represented conferences. That one, if you look at those visuals today and just oppose it to the political spectrum that we have in the country, you begin to realize that perhaps at the time, the Congress of the People was arguably one of the most representative political parties of all racial demographics of the country. Even within their leadership, Terror Lekota, speaking and closing that particular first conference of COPE, said that this is arguably the most representative leadership of the party to the people of South Africa. You had the likes of Mbazima Mashilowa sitting on the podium of that particular Congress before they had their own fallout. And that just speaks of the role in 2009 when COPE went into the political scene. They came back with 30 seats. 30 seats to the National Assembly, reducing the ANC from getting a two-thirds majority at the time. You remember former President Mbeki had a two-thirds majority. Jacob Zuma came in, ANC got the highest number of votes, but failed to get a 2/3 majority because of Lekota. Lekota meaning Mosiuoa Lekota, Congress of the People. And they were very dominant in the Eastern Cape, in Gqeberha, now called Gqeberha, then called Port Elizabeth, in the Nelson Mandela Bay Metro Municipality. They were very dominant there at that particular time. At the time, the ANC had to send a delegation to go and work that particular area because the wards, that particular area had become the base of the Congress of the People. Then you fast forward, come to Gauteng. At the time, Mbazi Mama is the premier. The Gautrain that we celebrate today.
They appealed to black intelligentsia as well.
They appealed to black intelligentsia. If you look at many black intelligentsia at the time who were in the relatively middle class, who were entering the workspace, who were providing intellectual work within the intellectual space, they were appealing to the Congress of the People. The Congress of the People appealed to them because they saw Jacob Zuma as something else, but they saw this particular party as that party that can represent them entering the workspace, wanting to climb up into the economic sector of the country. In Gauteng, they had, when Mosiuoa resigned, Paul Mashatile had to come in as the interim premier at the time. There was a ruckus within the provincial legislature of Gauteng. Paul Mashatile then came in. Mbazi Mosiuoa then went out to form the Congress of the People with Terror Lekota. You'd remember as well, if you look at the Gautrain, it was called the Mosiuoa train. The Gautrain is a legacy of the likes of Mbazi Mosiuoa when they were still within the top echelons of government representing the African National Congress. Subsequently, they left to form COPE. And after 2020, after 2019, 2014, EFF came onto the scene, and it was the demise of the Congress of the People because two bulls could not stop fighting.
It was a lot of internal strife that probably led to the demise now of COPE to a certain extent, as they no longer at least have representation in the National House in Parliament. Samkele, thank you very much for talking us through Mr. Lekota's legacy. That's SABC News reporter Samkele Maseko here, joining us as we continue to mark and speak on the legacy of Mosiua Terror Lekota, who passed away today on Wednesday.